Meggan Sundwall over here had a plan. Her plan was that she would go to her friend Kacee Terry's house. She would inject her with insulin and monitor her blood glucose until Kacee died. We know that's her plan because she had text messages to Kacee telling her that. On August 12th, 2024, Meggan put that plan into action. Kacee didn't die that day, but she did slip into a coma from profound hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar. And 3 days later, she was removed from life support and died. That is a really teeny little nutshell of what the trial is going to be about. There is a heck of a lot more information about the how and why. It kind of reminds me of that art form of pointillism, where you see up close, if you're looking, right up close, you see a bunch of little dots or little colors that don't make much sense, seemingly randomly arranged, until you have them all in place and you step back and you see the whole picture, and then it all makes sense. Then you see what it all means. And that is what is going to happen, I expect, with this case. There are a lot of witnesses that each have a little bit of the points that will contribute to your understanding of what happened here. Some of those witnesses have a whole bunch of points. Some of them just have a few. And they don't necessarily follow sequentially, which is why I wanted to give you kind of a heads up about what to watch for, what it is that they're going to be letting you know about, what their evidence is anticipated to be. Let me first tell you a little bit about Kacee. And throughout this morning, I'm going to refer to them by their first names. I don't mean any disrespect by that, by any means. It's just for simplicity, and because my little brain can't function any better than that. So I am going to refer to them as Kacee and Meggan, if that's all right with everybody here. But Kacee, at the time of her death, was 38 years old. She was a granddaughter, a sister, a niece, a valued employee, still loved ex-wife, and a friend. She had had some loss in her early life, or actually in her life leading up to her death. She had lost her mother when she was only about 4 years old to an extended illness. The aunt that she had that stepped in a mother role also died from an extended illness. She had a cousin she was close to that died, and her father died when she was only 24 years old. So she had a lot of loss. She herself had been born with only one kidney. That wasn't a huge deal, but it did present some health issues to her as time went on. At the time of her death, she also did have some valid medical concerns that did give her a lot of pain. One of those being endometriosis, one of them being prematurely and heavily arthritic knees. She had a lot of pain from those conditions and was prescribed medications for those conditions. She had prescribed oxycodone or Percocet. She had prescribed Xanax because she also suffered from anxiety pretty heavily. Her doctor, Dr. Masteller, who you'll hear from, had discontinued the Xanax prescription because he didn't want those on board at the same time. Kacee still wanted her Xanax and did admittedly go about getting it by probably less than legal means. She also, at the time she died, had a prescription for something called promethazine. It is diagnosed largely for nausea, but kind of makes people sleepy. And you will hear about that from her physicians as well, and the function of it. She had also had, at probably 2020-ish, a port installed in her chest. A port is like a little teeny doorway that leads directly into a vein, so that when you have a condition that requires frequent IV occurrences, you don't have to keep finding a new vein to puncture. You just put it directly into the port. And she had that port for IV fluids, for hydration, because that was a side effect of her kidney issues. Another another characteristic of Kacee that is relevant to this trial and plays heavily into it, and not to speak ill of the dead in any way, but Kacee was a liar. She told a series of lies. You will hear about them. One thing I think the evidence would support is that those lies were designed to get and keep people's attention and interest. She didn't know a better way than to feign some type of illness or for some reason to create drama and draw people to her that way. One of those lies, well, let me come back to that. In around this time frame, probably 2013, 2016-ish, Kacee met Meggan. They both worked at a facility called Chrysalis in Provo. That is a facility that offers services to people that are developmentally delayed or impaired. Kacee was a house manager there for inpatient residents, and Meggan was hired as a nurse. She's an RN, and that was her function there. Kacee actually met Meggan within her function as a nurse when Kacee came to Meggan to take her blood pressure. They kind of hit it off. They got along really well. Their relationship or friendship developed, and they became very, very close. So much so that Kacee spent a lot of time with both Meggan and her parents, her family, and they sort of took her in. There will be some testimony from some family and friends of Kacee's that it was kind of an odd relationship, in that Kacee seemed to be afraid of making Meggan upset or making her mad, and that she would do whatever she could to keep Meggan happy. Along those lines, probably in that same time frame in 2016, Kacee conveyed to Meggan that Meggan, was a beneficiary of Kacee's life insurance policy. She showed her documents that indicated there was up to $1.5 million that Meggan was going to be the beneficiary of. That was an ongoing topic between them from about 2019, 2020, all the way up until just a couple months before Kacee died. Meggan seeking assurance that that policy was still in effect, and Kacee giving her assurances that it was in effect. The truth is, there was no such policy. That was another one of Kacee's lies. Kacee, I don't know if any of you ever watched, or your kids, I should say, watched VeggieTales. My kids did when they were younger. There was one episode where one of the characters told a little fib, and it was this cute little bean that throughout the episode, the more the lie grew, this little bean grew and grew and grew and grew until it was this overwhelming size that was just going to take over and just overcome the character's life. That was kind of the case with Kacee, because she told a lie that turned into a whopper. She told people, most particularly including Meggan, that she had cancer. She didn't have cancer. She never did have cancer. But she told that to family and friends, and they all believed her right up until she was hospitalized in that diabetic coma. That is a lie, just like VeggieTales, that grew and grew and grew. And That is part of the life insurance policy lie also, because she didn't really, at 38 years old, didn't expect to be making anybody necessarily a beneficiary of her life insurance, except for this fake cancer that she had. In 2019, Kacee texted Meggan, and this is one of the texts that, from which you could find that Kacee was really just seeking care and concern from Meggan. That this text said, "Tell me that I'm not dying." And Meggan's response was not offering her affirming words or, live your life to the fullest while you have it or anything like that. She said, "I don't know if you're dying or not. I'm sorry. You need to be prepared no matter what happens." After this medical port I told you about was installed, Kacee portrayed that as being part of her cancer treatment. She told people that that was because of her cancer, and she had home health aides that would come to the house and help her with, doing that IV hydration, IV fluids. She had delivered to her home bags of saline for that purpose. That she told her family and friends that those bags of saline were her chemotherapy. The lie continued to grow. She portrayed to Meggan that she was close to death. She portrayed to Meggan that she was in tremendous pain from cancer and wished to be free of her pain. It was a frequent topic of conversation between the two, and we will show you, there are reams of text messages between these two. I think there are something like almost 29,000 text messages. We're not going to show you all of them. That we would be here the rest of the year. But we'll show you some, and there was one in 2020 where Meggan told Kacee, "There is nothing left for you here." She told her also in 2020, "You have so much more for you on the other side." In 2021, she told her, "What do you have to live for in this life? I truly believe everything for you is ahead of you, not here." And then another one where she told her with caps, "You have to let go. It is past time." Again, this is in the context of Kacee's wanting to keep Meggan happy and do what she wanted her to do. And Kacee went along with those text messages. She did pretend to be suicidal. She portrayed herself as being interested in ending her pain, the pain that didn't exist for the cancer that didn't exist. At some point, Kacee, this was in 2020, Kacee was living at Meggan's home also with Meggan's husband lived there too. And their conversations turned towards they discussed different means of ending Kacee's life. One of them was a gun. Kacee had access to a gun. Another was an overdose of pills. Of course, Kacee had access to all of that oxycodone and other substances. They settled on, eventually, insulin. Meggan told Kacee around September 1st of 2020 that she had checked with a pharmacist friend of hers, and that she would need about 100 units to end her life. 100 units of insulin is a little teeny amount. It's actually only a milliliter. There's 10 milliliters per bottle, so those last diabetics a good amount of time. And Kacee's family had a number of diabetics in it. There was insulin available at Kacee's home. where she lived after she moved out of Meggan's home, because her uncle lived there as well. He is diabetic. You'll hear from him. Her grandparents lived there. Her grandmother is diabetic. And uncle had recently died earlier that year, and he was diabetic too. So there was a lot of insulin, a lot of syringes accessible in that home. So Meggan and Kacee discussed the idea of Kacee's dying by insulin overdose. Meggan told Kacee that it would be easy. She would just fall asleep. And it wouldn't even necessarily be detectable at autopsy because it's a naturally occurring substance. Within a day or two of that discussion, Meggan brought home insulin and stored it in the refrigerator, and then texted Kacee a number of times over the next week or so, "Hey, that insulin's there if you want it. Don't forget the insulin. Are you going to use the insulin tonight? That insulin's still there. Aren't you going to use it?" Kacee, around that point, had communicated with Kylie that she thought Meggan was trying to kill her. And so Kylie and her husband, they waited until Meggan and her family left town, and they kind of swooped in and moved Kacee out of that house. At that point, both Kylie, the sister, and another friend of Kacee's saw the insulin in the fridge. You know, quite honestly, I don't know if Kacee really believed at that point that Meggan was trying to kill her. But I do believe that this is another story that Kacee used it was drama. It was something to elicit concern from the other people in her life, from Kylie and her friends. Anyway, she moved out of that house. She moved into a basement apartment at her grandparents' home in Highland. And as I mentioned, also living there was the uncle, another uncle initially, who died in January of 2024, lived there as well. During that time frame, that did not end the discussions about insulin and insulin overdose. Meggan asked Kacee in 2021 if Kacee was nervous to do it by yourself. And then she asked her, "You want to know what I would do?" Meggan told Kacee that she should draw up everything she had and give it all at once through her port, and then asked, "Do you want me to come over and do it?" Continuing her subterfuge, Kacee pretended that she had made attempts using insulin to kill herself. She would text Meggan that she had tried to do it, and she started to, this lie again continued to grow and grow and grow. And the details of it became so outlandish that it appears to be a cry for help. She knew she was making ridiculous claims, Kacee, thinking, I believe, that Meggan would catch on and call her on it. Kacee told Meggan that she had used 4 bottles of insulin. That is 400 times the amount that Meggan had told Kacee she would need to cause her death. At a later point, Kacee told Meggan she had used 9 bottles, 900 times what she would need, and she was still alive and kicking. Meggan didn't call her on it. She continued the conversations. "Oh, I can't believe that didn't kill you." And it continued to progress. Eventually, Kacee pretended to be in hospice care, that there were nurses and doctors coming over to her house all the time. She concocted a story about a surgery that her doctor, Dr. Masteller, was going to do for her, or arrange for her, that would allow her to absorb medication so she could die. That was one of her stories. Another story, she would send just ridiculous vitals to Meggan, knowing that Meggan was a nurse, and those vitals would be things like a temperature of 75 or a blood pressure of 0/40. Just insane, ridiculous, stupid numbers. And Meggan never called her on it. But these stories continued to grow. Kacee fabricated an entire hospice care team. And they would communicate, these fake people would communicate with Meggan through Kacee's phone. There was a fake nurse called Becky with whom Meggan would communicate on Kacee's phone. There was a doctor, Dr. Robinson. Kacee pretended to have Dr. Masteller coming to her home. There was, like I said, there was a whole team of these people, and they would communicate pretty regularly with Meggan, telling her, oh, she's near death, she's almost there. Meggan always expressed excitement about that. Oh, I hope it's true. To back up just a little bit, in March 2022, Meggan had sent a text to Kacee telling her somebody, parentheses, should probably be me, should be with you and continue to give you doses of insulin so your blood sugar will actually stay low and you can pass. Well, that became the plan. It was referred to a number of times after that Meggan would help Kacee. In June 2024, Meggan told Kacee, I'll come and help you and give it insulin to you regularly and see if it works. Kacee came up with another subterfuge, which is that she would tell Meggan, okay, I've drawn it all up, meaning I've put insulin into these syringes and it's all ready to go. She didn't want Meggan to be there drawing up the insulin. Kacee did it, and she Googled August 11th what would happen if I inject myself with saline. So I think you can put two and two together on those particular texts as far as what the reasonable inferences are there. On August 20th, 2024, Meggan asked Kacee when she could come and help, and offering today, tomorrow, Monday even. August 10th was a Saturday, 10th, 11th, Sunday, 12th, Monday. They initially agreed that Meggan could come and help on August 11th. Again, Kacee told her that she had drawn up the necessary syringes. But then, as Kacee regularly did, she postponed. She found excuses and put off Meggan. And so they agreed to Monday, August 12th. On Monday morning, August 12th, Kacee saw her uncle, Mark Farnsworth. You'll hear from him, and they had a good conversation. There was nothing unusual about it, didn't raise anything concerning in Mark's eyes. He just had a nice regular conversation with Kacee and then went about his day. He worked from home, from the upstairs part of the home. Kacee, like I said, lived in the basement apartment there. Mark noticed Meggan arrive. That was at about 9:54 a.m. And then, again, didn't pay much attention. He figured one of Kacee's friends was there and they were going to do something, and he went on about his day. When Meggan got there, or as she was approaching, she texted Kacee, do you want to take some promethazine when I get there so that you are asleep when this is happening? Somewhere around 9 p.m., Mark, so almost 11 hours later, Mark got concerned because he hadn't heard any sounds or signs of Kacee that entire day, and the vehicle, Meggan's vehicle, was still there. Kacee's grandfather had actually been trying to call Kacee and wasn't getting an answer, so Mark went to check on her in the basement. When he went into Kacee's room, he saw her lying on her bed, struggling to breathe, unconscious, or at that point in a coma, and Meggan sitting there watching her. Meggan's parents were also there. They had arrived about an hour earlier. Meggan had called them to come and give her a blessing of release, make her die faster. None of them called 911. Meggan claimed she didn't know what was happening. She was well aware of what was happening. They found a glucose monitor in Kacee's room that showed that her blood sugar had been tested 19 times over 10 hours. That began at 9:18 a.m. That was probably, most likely, because Meggan wasn't there yet, Kacee testing her own blood sugar to see what was normal for her. And it was normal. It was at about 87. That's a regular, perfectly good blood sugar level for a non-diabetic. Her blood sugar was tested 8 times as it dropped from 87 when she tested it to 64 by 1:19 p.m. Less than half an hour later, at 1:43, the monitor showed a level of 43. Kacee would very likely have been unconscious at that point. Your body requires blood or sugar in the blood to function. It's the food for everything that your body does, and she didn't have enough, and her body was shutting down. After Kacee was unconscious, her blood was tested 10 more times, and the only person that could have done that was the only other person in the room that was conscious, and that is Meggan Sundwall. For at least 7 solid hours, Meggan was there watching Kacee descend from confusion to unconsciousness to a coma, repeatedly checking her blood sugar to make sure it continued to drop. It did. Meggan did exactly what she had promised Kacee she would do, which was when she said, "I'll come and help you and give it to you regularly and see if it works." Well, it worked. By the time Kacee got to the hospital, her blood glucose level was 14. She was in a coma from which she never emerged, and she was removed from life support on August 15th. Was life insurance enough? Well, 1.5 or $1 million is a pretty hefty incentive for a lot of people, but Meggan also happened to be in financial distress, and that was another topic of conversation between the two of them. Since the beginning of the year, in January 2024, Meggan had lost her job. She had run over something on the road and caused $4,000 worth of damage to her car. The car ended up being totaled. Her husband had doubled his child support requirements from a prior marriage. They owed on taxes. And then the car that they did have kept overheating. But she was stressed financially. She expressed in February of 2024 to Kacee, Kacee expressed to Meggan, "I wish I could just pass so you could get out of this mess." And Meggan's response was, "If you dying would get me out of this mess and darkness I am in, I would take it." When police got there and realized that Meggan had been there and had left with her parents without waiting for EMS to arrive, without telling them what to look for to try to correct for Kacee, they instigated an investigation. Meggan was pretty cooperative. She talked to them a number of times. During an interview on August 15th, police asked her for her phone so they could look at the text messages that she had been describing, telling them that Kacee was suicidal. Meggan agreed. She didn't hand over the phone right then and there, but she did bring it to them on August 19th. When police went through that phone and compared Kacee's phone text messages with the text messages on Meggan's phone, they found that 283 of them had been deleted from Meggan's phone. When police asked her about that, she told them that she did it so she wouldn't look like she had done what Kylie was accusing her of, which was murdering Meggan, or Kacee, sorry. For deleting those messages, Meggan Sundwall is charged with obstruction of justice. That is simply, I want to make sure I'm saying it right, when someone alters or destroys anything, such as the text messages, with the intent to hinder, delay, or prevent a criminal investigation. That one's the easy charge. The other one is aggravated murder. Aggravated murder happens when somebody intentionally or knowingly causes the death of another and does so with aggravating circumstances. The aggravating circumstances that are alleged in this case are that she did it for pecuniary or financial gain, or that she did it by means, again, I want to make sure I give you the right language, causing death by means of a substance administered in a lethal amount. So the question that you will be probably spending most of your time on is cause. What does it mean to cause someone's death? Cause does not mean in the law in Utah that she had to be the sole cause. Meggan did not have to be the only reason that Kacee died. If you find beyond a reasonable doubt that Kacee would not have died but for the actions of Meggan, that is sufficient. I expect that my friend over here is going to argue in a minute that Kacee was suicidal and that she did everything she did herself. I also expect that he's probably going to spend a lot of time talking to you about reasonable doubt, and that's a hard concept to define. It's something that people struggle with quite regularly, at least in our field. It is reasonable doubt. It is not beyond all doubt or with no doubt, because we can't know anything in life. We don't even know for sure if the sun's going to come up tomorrow. There is, okay, not a lot, but there's probably doubt about that. So you don't have to be convinced beyond all doubt. But if you find from all of the information that's available to you that you are firmly convinced what the state has alleged happened, then that is enough. I talked earlier about the concept of pointillism and how all of those little points form a big picture. And the little points, just so you know who is coming, that are contributory to this picture will include Kacee's sister Kylie and her uncle Mark, her best friend Michelle Tingey, her ex-husband Kacee, her family calls him Boy Kacee, Kacee Tanner, a friend, Christian Clements, Kacee's employer, Mike Larson. You will hear from Meggan's parents, who were there for some of that incident that night on August 12th, Levoy and Renee Randall. Additional information will come from her doctors, Dr. Masteller, the doctor who performed her knee surgery, Dr. West. There is a nurse that communicated regularly with Kacee. Her name is Amber Ludvigsen. There is a nurse practitioner who took care of Kacee while she was comatose. Her name is Diane Allred. You'll hear from her. You will hear from one of the first emergency responders to arrive at the house that night. That is Lone Peak Police Officer Norman Robinson. Believed at the time the call came in was that they were responding to just an overdose or possibly a suicide. and treated it accordingly. You will hear from the investigating officers, Melissa Farney, Lone Peak Police Department detective, and Richard Hales, who has a really long title of Special Agent with the Utah County Attorney's Office Investigations Bureau. I spit it out. You will hear from the medical examiner that was in this case, operated in this case, or conducted an autopsy, Dr. Ben Murray. Also the toxicologist, Scott Larson. You will hear from also the special agent from the Utah County Attorney's Office that did the phone downloads, Justin Seitzinger. You will also hear from another medical examiner who didn't do the autopsy but has experience with insulin overdose cases to provide some additional information to you, and also an endocrinologist who has specialty in the effect of insulin on the human body, on a system. And she will be testifying. Her name is Dr. Kacee DeSalvo. So those witnesses will give you all those bits and pieces. Like I said, some of them are massive, some of them are tiny, but they all form that big picture. That overall picture is, I believe you will find that Kacee neither wanted nor intended to die on August 12th. Even though she pretended she did want to, in an increasingly desperate attempt to keep Meggan's attention and affection. The evidence tends to establish that Kacee thought she could handle Meggan, but she didn't count on Meggan's determination. Meggan was there. Meggan was in control. Meggan had the means and the knowledge and the understanding, and Meggan stood to gain from Kacee's death. Meggan wanted Kacee to die to relieve her from the stress of her financial situation, and that plan worked. Kacee died from an overdose of insulin. At the end of this trial, after you hear from all those people, we will again stand before you and ask that you find Meggan Sundwall guilty of having done so, guilty of aggravated murder, and guilty of obstruction of justice. Thank you.